I think one thing that founders believe about research is that they don't necessarily need it, and that they can often make the decisions for their consumers without research. What I have learned in doing this for a really long time is that we, as marketers, are typically not our consumers, and that what they need and the way they think and the way they behave is actually very different than the way we may think or what we may need or the way we may behave. They're not always the same. And so when we may suspect that we can make the decisions that will be relevant to our consumers, what I've learned is that because we're not always who our consumers are, those decisions can in fact be the wrong decisions. So where research really helps is it can help founders understand who their consumer is, what their needs really are, how they think, which ultimately drives how they behave. And that information can really help a founder or a brand understand how to not only orient their brand, but also the products and solutions that they provide to be able to address the needs of those target consumers. And that's ultimately how a brand grows. Research does a really good job of helping founders and brands understand who their consumers are and what it is they need in order to help the brand grow. Because often a brand will launch, grow really fast, but not necessarily understand who their target is and or who is actually buying the product. I cannot tell you the number of times we've had brands come to us and say, here's the state of our business, we've grown really, really well, but we need to understand what we need to do to keep growing, and we don't really know who our consumer is. So the very first thing I look for is, do we know who the target is? Do we know what they need? And is the brand really focused and or oriented towards delivering on what those consumer needs are? And I think it'd be surprising for people to understand how many times brands on the shelf actually don't have that information. With that information, however, I've seen lots of cases where a brand can really achieve step change growth by way of understanding those things. One brand that achieved step change growth by way of understanding their target consumer and certainly what that consumer needed and wanted was a brand by the name of Vans. So Vans was a small, natural, and organic frozen waffle brand that at the time was about a $20 million business. And while they had grown decently after they launched, they'd reached a point where they really weren't growing. They came to us and said, help us with that. We looked at what information they did have, which admittedly was little. They ultimately didn't understand who their target was. So we did some work to identify who their target consumer was and what those target consumers actually needed. The work that we conducted really indicated that in the frozen waffle category, AGO stands for taste. A brand by the name of Nature's Path really stood for nutrition, but no one really stood for both. And that's what this target consumer really wanted. They were really seeking a brand that was not only healthy, but one that would taste good at the same time. And so we recommended to them that they should reposition completely around those ideas, deliver both taste and nutrition at the same time. So that's what they did. They actually rebranded Vans to stand for Vans Simply Delicious, which through that communication, they obviously articulated that they were healthy through simply ingredients, delicious through taste, and the brand took off. It actually tripled in size over the course of 3 years and was ultimately sold to Hillshire Farms. That, I think, is an example of where when a brand really understands who their target consumer is, what they need, and then orients their products, packaging, communication, everything towards those needs, a brand can really grow pretty dramatically.